Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and the warmest of welcomes to Sea Fever. The warmest of welcomes to Sea Fever, North Norfolk's Festival of Poetry and Prose. We're here this evening courtesy of the Maltings having charge for none of the events that it has put on over this season of, in all, what will be 10 events. We're also here this evening courtesy of Hayes & Store, our sponsors. Normally I look behind and there's a huge poster saying Hayes & Store, your local North Norfolk solicitors. More seriously, we couldn't be here without Hayes & Store, who have unswervingly supported Sea Fever since its inception 2.5 years ago, and before, really, because of its support of the predecessor to Sea Fever, Poetry Next the Sea. We're also here this evening courtesy of not only the speakers this evening, but also their predecessors and those who will succeed them in the final event tomorrow. Peter York as speaker. All these people are giving their services, their considerable talents and their services without payment on a pro bono basis. To all these parties, Sea Fever gives its thanks. It would not be possible to run Sea Fever without these contributions. Thank you. It's a huge pleasure and privilege this evening to introduce Briony Bax. Briony, as most of you will know, I'm sure, has edited Ambit since 2013. And this, correctly please, Briony, is your very first collection in your own right.
It is.
And I think applause there, surely. I'm also delighted this evening to introduce Vicky Rangeley-Wilson. Again, she will need very little introduction for most of you, I'm sure. She is, I'm very pleased to say, a member of the advisory board of Sea Fever. She is an alumnus of the creative writing course at our local university, the University of East Anglia, and the University of Course, that put creative writing on an academic basis on the map, and she also took a doctorate there. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conversation with Briony Bax, Vicky Rangeley-Wilson, a very warm welcome to everyone, both offline and online.
Thank you, Jim. Right, so Briony, we've got lots to talk about tonight, particularly the whole mental health issue, which you have examined so beautifully in this pamphlet, and we're going to be talking about that in some detail. I want to talk about your poetry, but you're also quite well known to the audience here, to people in North Norfolk, as someone who some people might be surprised to find is a poet at all, because we know you as a very happy, successful woman with a happy marriage and a beautiful house by the sea, I may say, and I think what I know of you, that sea has given you a great deal of pleasure, from
That's right.
sea kayaking to gazing out at it,
Yes.
day and night. But what I wanted you to tell us about a little bit is the sort of more hidden background in your life, which, when we've discussed it before, seems to me to have been a history of quite significant upheavals, which have then demanded you to be quite resourceful in response. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, my husband and I have traveled a lot and lived in the States for 27 years and lived in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. I think we've moved 13 or 14 times since we've been married. So we've had a life of journeying, really, and quite by chance have ended up on this end of the earth, really, at North Norfolk, right on the coast. And it's been a really joyful place to sort of end up. But of course, with all that moving and constantly reinventing oneself and making new friends, and that always, you need to have a certain amount of resilience to be able to do that.
Exactly, and this, I think, is quite apposite when we're talking about mental health,
Yes.
because life throws challenges at people,
Yes.
and you have risen to lots of them very well. But the upheaval started early, and I don't know how many people know that your father was the poet Adrian Mitchell.
Yes.
And you were one of 3 children, and you didn't see very much of your father from about 6 months old. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yes, and I'm actually delighted my mother's in the audience here tonight, Maureen. My father was the poet Adrian Mitchell, and he was a wonderful poet, but not not particularly great father, I have to say. Left when I was 6 months old, so my mother was left with 3 children under 4, so that was a big challenge. We used to, as children, be sent to his house or wherever he was holidaying to stay with them. And I always found it very, very difficult as a child because you're taken from one environment and placed in a completely alien environment. And I suffered terribly from homesickness. And I used to feel really badly that I would be homesick at my father's house. But later on in his life, we actually had a huge reconciliation. So in the last 15 years of his life, he and I were very close, and he helped me actually with my poetry and encouraged me. And we had a wonderful correspondence for many years, getting to know each other. And so it actually ended up as a very happy story, but didn't start off quite as well.
Excellent, thank you. So would you say, in spite of that hiccup in that large part of your life, that he had been influential on your life and career in any particular way?
I think my father has 5 children, and I think actually I'm probably, I don't know if my other siblings would agree, but I feel that I had a very clear connection with him through my poetry. And I was very lucky to have him read my poetry, even though it was very difficult for some of it for him to read, because I do have some other poems that are titled In My Father's House, which is about this going to an alien environment that's supposed to be your family. So it's very hard for him to read those, but he was very good at giving feedback to me, even though it was a subject matter that was quite hurtful to him.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting to be able to separate the art from the subject matter. And in a way, as artists, we have to be quite clinical like that, the ability to move people, but also retreat and look at how to twiddle the knobs and get.
Well, you've got to be brave, haven't you? You've got to be brave when you're putting these things out there.
Which leads us on, I'd like to say, would it be lovely to hear the first poem from your collection?
Right, okay. The collection's called Lament, and I actually wanted to call the collection Mental, but I just thought it was really harsh. So my husband and I love to do crosswords, and Lament is an anagram of mental. So there you go. This is called World War III. 1 minute you were dancing, then standing in court with your hands trembling, babbling to the judge about how you joined the SAS. You took too many chances. Your deck of cards collapsed at 21. No 21 as you were dealt your hand, your pocket ace was only a 2. You lay in the single bed, helpless and curled, weeping, hair matted like a lost puppy, hands clamped over your ears to stop the voices. You never thought you'd be hunted, stalking the hallways with a kitchen knife, your eyes darting in the forest of headlights that dash through the front window. You never felt you were safe. Listening devices were buried in the chimney stack. Signals from Radio 4 about the destruction of the world. Your Jesus hair smelt of roll-ups. You became part of the special forces. A helicopter landed in our sitting room. Soldiers streamed around the sofa holding guns. World War III started in your kitchen.
Thank you. So I wanted to say that I think that's an amazing beginning, where you throw us into the action, you throw us into this chaotic state, you copter us into to someone's breakdown, and the protagonist, as it were, the subject of the poem is as surprised as we are by what has happened, which is beautifully effective. You've also taken this choice not to tell us at any point who the subject of the poem is, which I'm sure everyone can see would be for very good reasons, because it's clear throughout that this is based on real experience. You're not making it up.
Right.
But then you've taken this artistic choice to use the second person.
Yes.
which is very powerful. Could you tell us a little bit about why you did that?
Well, I did that because I really want people to be drawn into it. I wanted to protect the identity, obviously, of this person. And I also feel as if there are many thousands of people who go through these experiences and they are silent about them. And I felt like putting you, and then in the place names, I've said your town or our town or far town. I haven't given any clues as to destinations because I wanted it to be a universal truth, because I think people or families who go through these situations often are very quiet about it. But when you say to people, oh, well, you know, I've written this book, the subject matter is schizophrenia, and they say, oh yes, well, actually, my uncle was, you know, I think that would happen to him, or, you know, and there are many, many people know people who've been in these situations, but are very silent about it and don't necessarily find the help and support that they might need. So I wanted to really bring the reader in right away with the you, but I also wanted it to be a universal truth.
Great. Yes, and the combination of the detail and the way it's expressed with the second person does that interesting boundary that poetry creates between the specific and the universal, which is always so powerful. I'm interested as well in the images you use. Each stanza is a different image, and so many of them are military.
Yes.
Now, I don't get the impression from reading all the way through this collection that your friend was in the military himself. So why do you think they were military images?
Well, going through these experiences, often the psychosis was around military events. And I think that what is very clear to me is that when somebody is having a psychotic episode, for them it is absolutely real. There is no doubt in their mind that it's happening. It is happening. It is their truth. This person did have a time when they were involved in a hostage situation where the military were involved, and I think some of this might have come from that, because sometimes these psychotic episodes have a little grain of truth in them and you can follow them back. But I wanted to make it very clear that for this person, it was a real event.
Fascinating. And the disorientation that we feel, not knowing if this is true or not, perfectly places us into the mind of someone who's psychotic, who's suffering in that way, which is a great beginning. I wonder if we could move on and look at another poem slightly later on, which is very different in tone. It's a very different formally from this one, but very effective, please.
Yeah. Christmas, of course, is always a very difficult time for families who have relatives and friends sectioned. So this is called Jesus Visits Secure Ward 1. No one can leave on Christmas Day. Relatives are invited for a mince pie tea. The duty nurse pours out cuppers. We sit in a circle around a wooden coffee table on which sits a nativity set, empty of characters, only a manger and the stable wait. The vicar arrives here late, full of excuses, the traffic, the weather. He smiles at us, the forlorn. As crumbs of mince pie fall on the floor, he tells us the story of the first Christmas. One by one, he hands around the figures. First the family, Mary and Joseph, the wanderers, displaced from home, tired and upset, going into labor, forced to sleep in the shed with the animals. He hands me a donkey to place on the table. He hands you a cow to put beside it. The scene is being set. Then come the locals, the shepherds coming straight from work, cold and no doubt hungry as they gather. Enter the posh people, the kings with their gifts. Strange how they would even come to be here. No matter how reluctant, no matter how ill, each one of us works to recreate the scene. Finally, the baby, the child that will change everything, a plastic figure on a clump of straw. There now, says the vicar, our Christmas scene is complete. Now we can sing Away in a Manger. As we sing, my voice stumbles. In this wreckage of broken beings, we try to act normally. I think of the other gatherings in the Christmas commercials, all together by the glistening tree. At the end, the vicar takes my hand. I'm trying very hard not to cry. He hugs me, a huge bear hug. These are God's children, he whispers. Every one of them will have a special place in heaven to make up for this. I inspect the crib scene, straighten the tinsel on the roof, and fix the wonky star above it.
Very powerful, and such a realistic poem. You set the scene, you place the characters rather as the vicar is doing himself in the scene, and we feel the tension, the build up, and the contradictions and the similarities between the nativity scene and the scene of these poor people gathered on Christmas Day in secure Ward 1. How true are these events? What I was wondering. And what was your purpose in writing such a narrative poem?
I've always loved storytelling, so a lot of my poems are very narrative. I'm not very good at those poems that you try and pick things out of. I'm not very good at that. I'm good at telling stories, so I've always been interested in that. And I think that these poems are based on experience, but I always think when you write something, it becomes liquid and it becomes fluid, so that sometimes you weave things in that I don't want things to be the absolute, this is exactly how it happened. I think that would be very limiting, because when you're writing,
You want it to be lyrical, you want the story to unfold, and you want some sort of ending to it. And I always think that about a poem, that I want it to be almost not a complete story, but I do want people feeling like they've heard and they've seen something that is accessible. Obviously my work is very accessible, and I'm proud of that. I'm not one of those people who, oh no, you can only have poems that you don't understand and they're the only ones that are meaningful. I'm not that kind of poet.
That's actually what I was about to ask you about next, because this poem has words like cuppa and posh in it.
Yes.
So your diction is absolutely colloquial.
Yes.
It seemed to me that it must be quite deliberate.
Yes.
And I found a quote by your father where he says, most people ignore most poetry because most poetry ignores most people. And I wondered if that's a view that you agree with.
That is absolutely how I write my poetry, and I've always loved that quote. I think it's I totally agree with it. This idea that poetry is something up there that only educated people might understand, it's just absolute rubbish. There are some great people writing about lots of different situations, and I just think that almost all poetry has some value to it. I know there's a big debate in the poetry world about Insta poets and are they good, are they not? But some of those Insta poets have sold thousands and thousands of books of poetry, and shouldn't we celebrate that people are buying books of poetry? So I don't have that sort of, I don't subscribe to those ideas.
Excellent. No, absolutely. Great. You also use present tense, I notice here, which is a very good way of putting us in the unfolding scene in secure Ward 1. And I noticed that most of the locations, most of the settings in this pamphlet are places that most of us would never expect to visit.
Right.
And I wondered if that was intentional.
Yes. I mean, they're places that are very difficult to visit. I think one would hope nobody would have to go and visit somebody there, but the truth is that there are many wards in this country where people do have to be sectioned for their own health and for the health of other people. And it is a very difficult thing to section somebody and to see them having to be there. But, for the long-term health of a lot of these people, the longer that they are in taking their medicine, getting back on track, it does work.
But we're in a safe world kept apart from them, and you've taken us into the dangerous world with them in experiencing their isolation as well. Yeah. Which brings us round to your big poem, which I felt when I read it was seemed to spring completely out of necessity and was the heart of the whole piece. Again, very different in tone. You'll notice.
So this is a bit of a long poem, just warning you now. And this was the poem that I wrote. And after I wrote this poem, I took it to Nina Hervé at Rough Trade, and I said, look, I've got this poem and I'd like to build this pamphlet. And she said, absolutely, I'd love to do this with you. So thank you, Nina, for believing in this. And this was written really out of anger at the effective austerity on the mentally ill. Unlocking value, or how the government is screwing the mentally ill. This is a poem for the voiceless, for the people you pass lying in doorways, for the man sheltering under the underpass, for the woman who sleeps covered with frost, for all those sanctioned, humiliated, and homeless because they are mentally ill. 30th of January 2017, the form. It comes in a thick brown envelope addressed to you, 20 pages from the Department of Work and Pensions and a company called Capita. I look up their website. Outsourcing is not just about saving time and money, and we're not just about outsourcing. We think differently and help our clients unlock value in a number of ways. I ask you the questions on the form and I write down your answers as your spider writing is illegible. Name, date of birth, all the usual stuff. Diagnosis? Diabetes, you say. I write down paranoid schizophrenia and diabetes. Can you lift your hands above your head? No. Yes. Do you have trouble walking 10 meters? No. Do you have trouble walking 20 meters? I don't know. Do you have toilet accidents and wet your pants? No. If yes, how often do you need to change them? Never. Can you lift packages over 1 kilogram? Yes. Can you lift packages over 5 kilograms? What's 5 kilograms when it's at home? Can you shop for food? Yes. Can you prepare food? Yes. The catechism goes on for 20 pages. I have you sign it, date it, and I send it in the post. I write to my MP and the head of DWP. I suggest that all MPs be made to fill in the form as they too receive government monies. 3rd of March 2017, the assessment. The notice comes of your assessment, 9 a.m. in an industrial park in Fartown, 30 miles away with no bus route. If you miss your appointment, your PIP will automatically be stopped. I take a morning off work to take you in my car. The morning comes, I pick you up and make you bring the plastic box. The box with day compartments for your meds. The box you collect from the pharmacy once a week. Your leg twitches as we drive. The Capita offices are modern and sleek. We sit in the lobby in this empty industrial park. I wonder how you would find it if I wasn't with you. Someone who can't use a smartphone, someone who can't read a text or send an email. We get called. The assessor is a nurse. Looking good, I think. She'll understand. I place the medicine tray on the desk. She looks at you. I see you can walk quite well. Yes. Your pills are given weekly, not monthly? Yes. Why? I don't know why. Can you do your own shopping? Yes. Where do you do your shopping? Morrison's. Do you walk there? Yes, it is behind my flat. Do you talk to anyone there? No. Tell me about your friends. I don't have any. Do you feel any anxiety? Yes, often. How does that affect your life? I don't know. All the time she's typing into a laptop. As a nurse, surely she can look at these medicines, these endless pills, and know they don't give clozapine to people who are well. Most people don't have to take 15 pills a day. At the end, she smiles.
Thank you for coming today. We will give you our findings in a few weeks. If we find at that time you do not qualify for PIP, your allowance will be stopped immediately. You may appeal, but your allowance will be stopped pending court action. 22nd of March 2017. The notice. I dread these brown envelopes with capita in large letters. We regret to inform you, blah, 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 blah. Out of a possible 30 points, you scored 0. Therefore, your personal independent payments will be stopped immediately. £75 a week cut just like that. You may appeal online. What good is that? You don't have a computer. You don't have an email. You can't even read your own texts. On your behalf, I appeal online. We are given a court date. 9th of April 2017, the Disability Charity. He was kind enough to see us in the crowded office off the marketplace. This hero with one arm and one leg who advocates for the disabled. Saints are living among us. He's astounded at your story, indignation flaming from his mouth. I say I'm your appointed guardian. You say I kidnapped you. The hero writes a letter of us in support of our appeal. He says he will come to court on his day off. An angel in a mire of mud. 29th of May 2017, Our Town County Court. There are 3 people behind the bench, a doctor, a judge, and a disability advocate. They seem concerned as if they've seen this all before. Kindly, they ask questions, but first they say they are surprised to see you in court. They say that having seen your papers, they think you are entitled to PIP support. Their questions start. Do you go on holiday? Yes, all the time. I've been to Spain, France, and Scotland. Do you work? Yes, I work all the time. I work in a shop. I work riding a motorbike. I work in a nightclub. Do you cook for yourself? Yes, I'm a good cook. Do your representatives have anything to add? Yes, I say. Number 1, the holidays he's referring to happened pre-1983 when he was first sectioned and hospitalized. Number 2, the jobs he's referring to were temporary and happened pre-1983 when he was first sectioned and hospitalized. Number 3, this is the first time he has been living independently since he was 20 years old. At the age of 57, he is learning how to cook, clean, and try and keep a tiny flat in order. His cooking extends to ready meals. In the last few months, he has had his personal allowance cut and his personal independence payments stopped. In the last few months, he has suffered extreme stress due to the assessment by capita. In the last few months, I have been scared he will have to go back to a locked hospital ward. They look at us and shake their heads. They ask us to wait to hear their verdict. You bolt, ran out of the building. I find you smoking on a park bench. That was rough, I say. You pull on your cigarette hard. It's good news. Do you want to hear? 18 points. They give you 18 points. PIP to be backdated to when it was cut. You don't respond. You are exhausted. I've heard that 30,000 people have been to court. I fear for the ones who don't have family, the ones who miss their assessments, the ones who can't fill in the forms, the ones who are sanctioned only to be found frozen dead on a street corner.
Wow, well, we'll just let that settle in for a moment.
Yes, you need a bit of a breath after that one.
Auden famously said that poetry makes nothing happen. This poem is very political.
Yes.
And
I don't believe Auden for a minute. So I'll just say that. I think there are plenty of poets and plenty of songs and writers who have changed things.
absolutely. We were talking this, earlier about the First World War poets who started off with a narrative of war being marvellous, just like the Homer and the Virgil that they'd read at their private schools, and then Jessie Pope praising the war, and slowly the experience turned into this poetry, which is still very hard-hitting now, has really changed the world's view of war.
Yeah.
Has changed the world.
Yeah.
And there are many other instances of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think also, I don't know if anybody saw the film I, Daniel Blake, but I think that really, I mean, I saw that, and then, I went through this experience, and once you're in it, you're in this place that you cannot believe exists in this country. And yet a lot of people don't know about it. So really part of my big motivation for writing the book was then to go out and talk about this and talk about the fact that we are not supporting the mentally ill in the way that we should be.
I think you capture it beautifully. Lots of wonderful details. The money that seems to be spent on this inquiry by Capita, which turns into everything having to be reversed with more money spent in the courts.
Yes.
The glamorous, cold lobbies in buildings in industrial estates, very effective. And I particularly love the way that you take slogans, which of course is almost the antithesis of poetry, where in poetry you revolutionize the language, you pull apart all the ways people are used to hearing things, and you just capture the phrase, a new phrase that makes people see things freshly. Whereas the slogans about unlocking value perfectly attempt to hide the truth and disguise it in this kind of saccharine coating, and you skewered it beautifully.
And well, I do have to say, it did come directly from the Capita website, and I'm sure, I have referenced it, and I'm sure Capita will probably sue me, but I would be delighted to be sued by a Capita, because then we could actually talk more about what the practices are and what was in place. So I would defend that choice.
Excellent. And then there's much more that we could say about that, which I think we might be able to come back to in a little while, but just letting it settle into people. I'd quite like to move to the last poem you have in the collection, which again is very different tonally. Now, I slightly misread it the first time, but in a way that works.
Yes.
We've had a journey really through this book with two people, because we have the subject who has schizophrenia and his close friend who is trying to help him navigate the obstacle course which has been laid out for him. But this doesn't happen without an effect on the speaker as well. And I think that this last poem says something very interesting to us. Again, another stage further forward about mental illness and our experience of it.
I think when you're very close to people who are mentally ill, you think about, gosh, could this happen to me? Would this ever happen to me? Would I ever have this experience? And I had this is a very personal experience, because it is about an experience I had during a time, sort of a very stressful time. But I actually see this poem as something of joy, because I had this one time when I had this psychotic experience, and I almost felt relief after I had had it, because I had had it, and also because I really understood then what it's like and the realities and how real it is when that happens. So this is called When It Comes. I've been expecting you, like a groom standing at an altar, waiting, sweating with anticipation, doubt swimming in my head. When you come, I'm caught off guard, my brain swirling and tears falling and never stopping. Breath short, I might die right here. I have to walk fast across the common, get back to the flat, be somewhere safe, have tea and cake. You don't come for me in the kitchen. You wait until I'm lying down, practicing my breathing, trying to get myself under control. First, you are just one tiny spider crawling out of the wallpaper. Then come your sisters, gangs of them, an avalanche of arachnids. I've been expecting you. I've known that you were coming, that my brain would one day crack and you would be let in. Beautiful, beautiful vision, the secret space of my sight. Welcome, welcome, my sweet, sweet spider children.
taken us the whole journey from the shock at the beginning to actually experiencing the psychotic event yourself. You've brought us in it, made us live it. I think that's, people will agree that that's such an important thing to be doing. We have, for too long, pushed mental health issues outside of our society right to the edge of things. From the Renaissance onwards, we were locking people away. We were going to watch them at the Hospital of Bethlehem, which became known as Bedlam, watching them for entertainment, suffering from these terrible traumas going on in their minds. And I think more and more people are realising that mental health issues happen to all of us at different points. There's some statistics we were looking at earlier that, according to the Mental Health Foundation, 1 in 6 people in the past week in this country have had a mental health issue, a problem that's occurred to them. 10% of children between 5 and 16 have clinically diagnosable problems. The statistics go on. And many of these situations are made worse, and 9/10 of sufferers say that it's the stigma which makes it so worse. So it makes it so terrible for them, makes it much worse. And any kind of delay in treatment also makes it worse. So if someone is stigmatized, they can't come forward, the problem gets worse. And you've described beautifully how the institutions of state are able to make that even more terrible and push people over the edge, from which it's a long journey back.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people who spend a lot of time in institutions under section or in and out of institutions and going into halfway houses and everything, what happens, of course, later in life is their physical health suffers, because on lot wards they don't have exercise bikes, they don't have facilities for entertainment. I mean, people are just basically sitting around smoking and eating jam roly-polies. They're not, so then later, you know, many people who suffer from schizophrenia then go on to be diabetic and have all these problems because their physical health hasn't been taken care of, or it's been hard to take care of their physical health as well.
So it's a slight relief from that, and we'll come back to it with some questions on that subject, I think, a bit later. But we wanted to end with something a bit more nautical.
Yes, yes, we are at sea fever.
So we're at sea fever. So we're coming back to the subject of the sea, and to the other side of Briony, which she has to be many people, as we all do, and one of them is a mother and a grandmother. Yeah. And life can be the opposite end of the spectrum sometimes.
Yes. So yes, I've recently become a grandmother, which I'm so proud of. I'm sure I've bored lots of people silly in this room talking about it. But we are at sea fever, and I had written a poem, and it's going to be published next year in an anthology of motherhood. So you're going to be the first people to hear it. It's called Salting the Blood. We come before the hordes, an early breakfast at Brancaster Beach. Blueberries packed in tiny plastic pots, peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in paper, blue swimsuit under my linen dress. Seagulls are our only companions. A waning tide ripples with slight waves. The sun winks at the clamshells. I want to soak your skin with sea, teach you to jump waves, to run on an empty beach at dawn. My legs ache in the sand steps as I carry you to the tide line. I place you on the wet shore, hold your hand as you totter to the water. You wiggle your toes in the sinking sand. I hold you between my legs, my hands under your armpits. The wave comes and we jump. Your body is heavy. My arms are getting old. I lift you up and up and up. Nana, 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 again, again, again. The waves come in and in and in. Liam, 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 they sing. Granny is salting your blood.
A beautiful image of baptism there.
Yes, exactly. I'm not a religious person at all. I do think people should be baptized in the sea, though.
I'm also interested that this version of the poem you gave me a few weeks ago
Yeah.
has quite a few lines, different already from
Yes.
the one you just read, which
Yes.
shows us a lot about the
Yes.
process of writing poetry. And I wonder if, before we have some questions,
Yeah.
you could just tell us a few things about how that process works for you.
Yes, well, obviously for me, my poetry is very visual. It always starts with an image. And I write a draft, then I will read it out loud, and then I will rewrite that draft, then I will read it out loud again. And I'm constantly revisiting my poems. So they're never finished, ever. And so, yes, your version there, when they took it for the anthology, I said, well, yes, you can have it, but you must proof it with me when it goes out, because I can tell you it will have changed by the time you come to publish it, because I will constantly be honing it and mainly taking words out and trying to just get the essence of things, and trying to get rid of anything that is unwanted and unneeded. Somebody once said that poetry is like a diamond. You know, it's the essences, and it's the getting down to the real point. And I think that's where I try to get to. But everything is always changed. I mean, even poems in this book, you know, if I was writing it again, there are lines, even when I'm reading, I'm thinking, oh gosh, I should have put this here, or I should have done that, or I mean, and so I'm constantly, I think it's a mistake to think that poems are ever finished. I think they have a life of their own. And I think if you just let them sit and cogitate for a bit, I talk to a lot of people who are starting writing. Obviously at Ambit, I have to reject thousands of people, and a lot of people say, oh, this poem just came to me, I just wrote it down, it's here, and I've come. And I always say to them, just sit, play with it, you know, just think of it, as I said, fluid. Think of it as something that's fluid. It's never done, never done.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the audience?
I'm sure we do, Vicky.
Yeah.
Because of the mics, when the questions come, can you repeat them so that those are picked up by the online audience?
Absolutely, yes.
Can I start by saying, Briony, will you admit to us any particular influences on this first collection of yours?
Now, that question is, will you admit to us any particular influences on this first collection of yours?
Well, I think there are lots of influences. I think, obviously, my father was a very political poet, and so obviously that is a huge influence on my work. I also I have to read a lot of poetry books for work. I really like the work of Luke Wright, who's a young poet, and the way that he talks about things. So that would be it. When I was young, I read Walt Whitman endlessly. And those are, yes, I think those are the people that I would point to.
Yes.
The scenes and the imagery are so cinematic. I'm just wondering whether the art of filmmaking informs the way you present your poetry.
So the question is that an observation that the scenes are very cinematic, and is the art of filmmaking informing your poetry?
I think it has to have some kind of influence. My husband and I lived in LA for many years. I wrote a script there. My husband has worked in the film business for many years. And that's when I've written poetry, people have always said, oh, it's very, very visual. I think that what I was talking about the storytelling element and the wanting it to be, to really place people, to make you feel that you're really, really there, is something I'm interested in. I'm very interested in the physical world around the poem. So I think that, but I think when you write in different genre, I've just recently dabbled in playwriting as well. I think when you work in different genre, I think it does spill over into other. But I think, it would be interesting, because I think that particularly that long poem would really work well as a short film. And that's something that we might have to explore at some point.
Any more questions? Jane?
It's really wonderful to hear you reading your poetry, Briony. It was a real treat, because I've read the pamphlet only fleetingly, because I've been moving house, as you know, but now I should look at it with such a different angle, emotion, and so on. So that's a real treat. Now, and I agree with everything you say about Daniel Blake. I think it should be actually compulsory viewing in this country and everywhere. Now, Stuart and I argue constantly, this is very basic, as to what is poetry. He's a traditionalist, sorry, Danny. So I'd like the definitions from a poet and an academic, please, how you define it.
So the question is how you define poetry. This is springing from a debate, a domestic debate between a traditionalist and someone who's less traditional. How would each of us define it?
I don't think the debate quite captures the essence of the argument.
The argument. Well,
An argument.
I'm going to reply with a story, as I'm such a storyteller. So with that long poem, I wrote that while I was in a poetry class with Helen Ivory, the poet. And we had a discussion about it, and she said, you know, obviously it's a prose poem, but if there's this particular Japanese form where you have a prose poem and then you have haiku entered into it. And she said, why don't you, I think it's called haiban, but I may be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But she said, why don't you try it with that? And so I played around with that, and it felt such a forced form onto that poem that I actually gave up doing that, because it did not feel as if that poem fitted that form, and I was really reluctant to force a poem into a form that it didn't want to be. I personally think that poems are living, breathing things, and sometimes you can put them very nicely into a sonnet, and you can write a lovely sonnet or a villanelle or whatever it is you want to do. But if you say, oh gosh, every other line has to rhyme, otherwise it's not poetry, you are going to miss out on an awful lot of fabulous work.
Right. I hardly know where to start or finish with my definition of poetry, but if you think about the power of a very old form of poetry that you have in, say, religious services or scriptures, there is a power that words have through their sound and their rhythm, which puts us into a sort of a strange kind of almost hallucinatory state where we are taking in the words and they're falling on our consciousnesses in a way that you don't get by saying, can you put the kettle on? You know, there's a completely different diction, a completely different tone that poems are capable of exercising upon us, which you can only do if it's within the confines of a poem on the whole. So I would also say they have a power to create images in the mind, and often writing has been compared to magic, as in Prospero in The Tempest, for example, about how one word followed by another, and suddenly there it is, the scene. You see it before you, just as we did with Jesus Visits Secure Ward 1. That's a kind of power that we get from poetry as well. And yeah. So it doesn't have to it doesn't have to rhyme, it doesn't have to scan, but there is a great power to rhyming and scanning that in itself can be extremely effective.
I have to say I'm also poetry editor of the New European, so I have to read a lot of political poems every week that people send in, and there's a certain demographic that love to do these rhyming couplet poems, which is fine. And but often the words that they're using in order to get that rhyme are not the most descriptive words that they could be using. And so Stuart, I'm going to give you a challenge. I'm going to ask you to write a prose poem for me and see if you can do it. See if you can write a poem without form. That will be a really good exercise for you, and see what happens.
Shakespeare writes prose poems.
Of course, yes.
And I wouldn't contest the fact that they are poetry.
That's just a point that Shakespeare writes prose poems as well. Thank you. Any more questions, please, from the audience? Yeah, do we have any Zoom questions?
Oh, are there any Zoom questions?
We've just got one. Are you very disciplined in your writing life in terms of time, or do you just wait for inspiration?
Are you very disciplined in your writing life in terms of time, or do you just wait for inspiration?
No, I have no time. I am a very busy person in many different ways. You know, I'm editor of Ambit, I'm poetry editor of the New European, I'm a local councillor, I'm on the board of lots of different things. Plus, I work in Kenya, which is a whole different side of my life with all these wonderful children there. So I don't have much time for writing. So I have to sort of grab it where I can. Recently, during lockdown, I had to go to London for 7 days and because I was having a medical procedure, and I had to lock down completely and not go to the shops or anything. And I have to say it was one of the most productive times in my writing life, because I was completely alone and I decided I was going to write a play in those 7 days. And so I wrote for about 7 hours a day and did it. Got 50 pages worth of a play. And so what I need is solitude, and it's hard to get it. So I did at one point start writing poems on my iPhone on the tube in London. Every time I went on the tube, I thought I'll write a poem and I was going to call them tube poems. But I didn't find that to be, I'm too distracted because I'm too interested in what other people are doing. I'm a very nosy person. You know, I want to know, you know, who's sitting with who's doing what. I fantasize about what, you know, if somebody's opposite me on the tube, you know, where are they going? Who are they? Where have they been? You know, I just have such an active imagination that the tube poems just didn't work. So, but when I decide to write, I am disciplined. But what I don't have is enough time. So I'm hoping that in the future I'll be able to carve out some more time to write. Thank you, Zoom, for a question. It's great to have questions on Zoom.
So do you find it very difficult as a writer yourself, and knowing all the challenges in trying to get it there and how vulnerable you make yourself, that you're having to reject all these people month after month?
Well, I think it's difficult. I only find it difficult when I have to go, and at the moment we don't have to do that, but when I'm at a book reading, you know, one of those London book cocktail parties, and I'm introduced to someone and they say, oh, you rejected me. And I say, well, I've probably rejected about everybody in this room, so don't feel badly about it. It's very difficult being an editor, because we publish 1% of the work that gets sent to us at Ambit. So you can imagine how many people we have to say no to. And it's very difficult. People are very naturally sensitive about their work. And many poets have sensitive egos, I would say. And so, but it's all part of poetry. There's a wonderful movement in poetry, which I really agree with. Joe Bell wrote this fantastic book on how to be a poet, and I recommend it to everybody. And in it, I think in it, they talk about aim for 100 rejections a year. So you have to send out so many poems in order to get 100 rejections. If you send out that many poems, you're actually going to get a lot of acceptances in there too. But you've got to get your work out there. And I think that's what a lot of poets don't understand, is that you've got to identify the person that's going to really like your poetry. So I knew with that long poem, I knew that Rough Trade, this was exactly the kind of thing that they were interested in. There were many other people I could have sent it to who would have completely rejected it. I always say about Ambit, you know, don't send me cat haikus. We're not going to publish them. But people do. You've got to understand the publication or the publisher that you're going to approach, and that really helps. But yes, I could go on for hours about how to get accepted, and that whole process of running a magazine is where you take submissions. It's very tough for people. So we try to be nice, but it's hard.
Is there another question from the audience? Whereas I've got one more I can...
I've got another one too.
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
It's what's your ambition around your writing? Do you have a number of books or plays in mind?
What's my ambition around my writing? Well, it's been hard to launch a book during lockdown because we were going to have a launch at the British Library and all this, stuff, and we haven't been able to do that. Plus, I haven't felt that comfortable up to now putting this subject matter out on the web because I've been thinking very much during lockdown that if there are people who are living by themselves that are having all these problems, I don't want to have triggers for them. So I haven't put it out there. But now I would like to spread the word about Lament, and I would like to start the discussion about how we treat mentally ill people. I would like my poems, I would like my work to make a difference. I believe that I'm not a religious person. My belief is that one should leave the planet a better place than you found it. And I think giving a voice to people who don't have one is a very good use of one's time. Obviously, I'd like to publish more books, and I'm interested in plays at the moment, so I'm doing some work on that. So we'll just see where it goes. But I'm not really ambitious for myself. I'm more interested in how the poetry can work and change things for other people.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Well done. That's it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very
Vicky.
much, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you.
Thank you to Zoom. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, everyone on Zoom.
Thank you.